Hello and welcome to Faith Matters. This is the show where we take a look at Merseyside life and its issues through the prism of faith and belief. And our studio guest today is Gerry Proctor from Engage, Liverpool. Welcome, Gerry.
Thank you, Keith.
Before we come to talk about Engage, give us a little bit about your backstory. You're from Liverpool originally, obviously.
Yeah, but I've spent all my life explaining why I haven't got a Scouse accent.
Yeah, why is that?
Born in West Derby till I was about 7, 8, moved to Formby, went to school in Crosby, St Mary's Crosby, so Catholic background. Then at the end of school, went to university at Durham, where I read theology while training to be a Roman Catholic priest. Ordained back in Formby in 1977 by a really good Archbishop, Derek Warlock, and then was appointed to St Helens, where I worked with young people for 8 years as a school chaplain and a town chaplain, and then went to work in South America for a further 6 years in Ecuador and Bolivia. Yeah. So 4 years in Ecuador, 2 years in Bolivia with the Lamp Project, and then came back to work in St Margaret Mary's, Pilch Lane, Dovecot, Notty area, where I was for 12 years before changing and coming into the city centre.
So you were a priest for how long? I managed to add all that
up. That's a good question. Still
a priest.
Still a priest, and about 30 odd years, 77.
Right, okay.
Work out the maths, I'm not good myself at math. Probably 38 years, something like that.
So you are the chair of Engage Liverpool.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Engage is an organisation that grew out of people who live in the city centre for a variety of reasons, really. Working and living in apartments in the city centre means that most of the people are either renting, which is the majority, or owner-occupiers. And the management of those blocks, certainly from a decade ago, left an awful lot to be desired. There was nobody that we could turn to in the city centre to improve the quality of where people lived. And it was very stressful. I watched relationships, collapsing where I was, people very, very stressed because of where they lived and not being able to resolve the problems where they were living. So Engage is the product of a previous group called the Liverpool Waterfront Federation of Waterfront Residents Associations. And I was the second general secretary of that group. First one was Michael Swerdlow from the Colonnades, and then I was following him, and then Engage grew out of that. So it was a grassroots movement of people supporting each other, sharing good practice, trying to find out who the good managing agents were in the city, and we developed quite an expertise really over the years.
So, some of our viewers might be thinking, what's a Roman Catholic priest doing this for? What's the connection?
Well, I suppose that's a very good question, actually. I chose to live on the waterfront when I left St Margaret Mary's parish because I was genuinely interested in new forms of living in the city. And St Margaret Mary's was a very big parish. In fact, it was the largest parish run by diocesan clergy.
Whereabouts is that?
Notty Ash,
right.
Dovecot, the two areas. And we had 6,500 Catholics in the parish, and wonderful. It was probably the happiest time of my life. But I'd come from Latin America, where I'd run a parish, Catholic parish, of course, that had 60,000 people, all on my own. So although there was a lot to do, it never felt anything like as challenging as my life in Latin America. And although I was there for 12 years, I suppose I was always looking for something that would be challenging in a new way. And I've always regretted the fact that the Catholic culture has always been a little ghettoized and focused mostly internally on itself. So in many parishes, the opportunities for involvement are all around, can you run the catechism class? Can you look after the altar servers? Can you clean the church? Or a lot of churchy events. Whereas I really wanted a church that was in the world, related to the world, because that's what it was like in Latin America. And I kind of wanted that to be part of my life here as well. So I consciously chose to go and live in a place where, as a Roman Catholic community, we had no history of ecclesiastical parishes, because it's the dockland, brownfield site. So no parishes went as far as where I was now living. Plus, there was I think a myth at the time that people who choose to live in apartments don't want to know each other. They want a private, quiet, isolating life. And I wanted to see whether that was true, because that ran counter to all my feelings about what Christianity was really about.
And what human beings are like.
Exactly, yeah. And I think I've found out it's wrong. It's a myth. It's not true. People do want to know their neighbours. They do want to connect. They want a sense of belonging. But many of them, because they're a predominantly young crowd, don't know how to do it. They need some kind of support, encouragement, somebody else to take initiatives to knock on doors and, organise some kind of social event or a meeting for people to get involved in. So I chose to go and live there really because I wanted to see whether I could have any influence personally and whether my faith really related to that kind of situation beyond a parish or outside a parish.
So you were bringing principles and values that you'd learnt in Latin America into that context on the waterfront. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, very much. Absolutely.
So
yeah.
Values around liberation theology?
Well, that's hard to say, because liberation theology is very much focusing on people who are poor
and oppressed.
Yeah. And whereas you can't say that about the waterfront or city centre living. However, there are problems, there are difficulties, there are challenges, and there are human beings. And I suppose I've spent a fair bit of time in the last 10 years or more just listening to the early hours of the morning to neighbours who live around me with different levels of problems, which are, for them, massively oppressive.
Now, I know that you're well known across the city, but you're well known in that area and also in what's become the Baltic Triangle, which is a commercial district which is growing in the same area. Do people see you as a priest, do you think?
Liverpool's a village. Everybody knows who you are, and if they don't know who you are when they meet you, they find out very quickly. So yeah, there's no hiding the fact. And I haven't broadcast that I am a Catholic priest because I'm not involved in parish work. The work I do is very quiet, very ordinary. The ministry I have is my own way of living a priesthood that's not involving a sacramental life, that's just working with people who have no allegiance to a parish community. So it's not appropriate to, and we're not trying to set up a parish in that area.
I suppose in a way you are standing in that gap between God and humankind, and that's a priestly role as well, isn't it? That kind of bridging is a bridging work that you're doing, really, in lots of different directions.
To be honest, the most valuable thing that I learned in Latin America that I'm trying to and loving doing now was there were communities of insertion. Religious life in Latin America had shifted from being large convents and monasteries to communities of insertion, where 3 or 4 religious sisters and brothers would go and live right in the heart of a very, very poor area and just live there with no work to do specifically, just to share the life of the people and do, of course, work emerges from it. Needs begin to arise, and because of the levels of education or contact that the religious community in Latin America would have, they obviously were sharing that with the people they were living with, helping them to organise, helping them to form organisations and communities. And that's really something I've done. But I didn't start by wanting to do that. It's happened organically. We formed a committee at City Quay where I live, and I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to get involved. And Steve Mumby, who's one of our local councillors, was at the first public meeting. 70-odd residents were at, because they were up in arms with all the problems that was happening around there. And I was just there, and Steve knew me from 1992 in my work from St Margaret Mary's and the Latin American community in Liverpool, where we were celebrating 500 years of resistance of the Latin American peoples to the Spanish, they call it a discovery. How can you discover people who are already there? But so Steve and I worked together on that project, and when he spotted me in the crowd, that was the last chance I had of being quiet and anonymous. So I became part of the first organising group of the Residents Association, and then they asked me would I, without knowing anything about me, would I chair the group? And from that it went to the Federation of Residents Associations on the waterfront, and then Engage grew out of that.
Interesting. I mean, of course, that's what the Celtic Church were doing all hundreds of years ago. That insertion, that ministry insertion was, on these islands hundreds of years ago. The Celtic Church was doing the same. We're going to our commercial break now. When we come back, I want to just ask you quickly about your MBE, and then we'll come and talk about some of the issues at the waterfront and beyond in the city. So join us after the break for Faith Matters. Welcome back to Faith Matters. In the studio today we have Gerry Proctor from Engage Liverpool. Gerry, you received an MBE. Was that recently or a few years ago? I just see it.
I'm not sure. I think it was 2012.
So fairly recently.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was a complete shock, and it's not something I think about. Huge honour, massively unexpected, and I'd say unwarranted. Some very kind people who've seen the work that I was doing with Engage and valuing the work of Engage in the city centre as a place of dialogue, of bringing together stakeholders in the city centre and the voice of residents, and doing it in a way that's not confrontational and is actually attempting to create partnerships and working relationships from a situation where, to be honest, wherever I tell people I work with residents, people just go, oh, whoa, imagine things to be horrific, aggressive, angry, and we've worked very hard that that's not the case. So I think, plus of course Engage is unique. There isn't an organisation like it in any city in the UK, and it's typically Scouse, grassroots, started in the area where there was no support, no help, and no money. We still get no money. We have to raise every penny we spend. We raise
where
ourselves.
Does that come from? Where's the money come from?
We just go and ask people. Liverpool's a wonderful place. There are some very generous people who value the work of Engage and say, well, we'll support what you're trying to do. So, for example, we got some support from a housing association to run our seminar series this year, and from a developer who have seen the work of Engage and wanted to be part of it and wanted to make sure we kept going. So we brought 3 international architects, one from Rotterdam, one from Paris, and one from Vienna, over a 3-seminar series to look at the design of apartments in Europe. Liverpool prides itself in being a world-class city. The reality is, from the perspective of people who live in the city centre, we're not even European class, because the quality of apartments leaves a huge amount to be desired. And we wanted to be part of raising the bar, encouraging families to live in the city centre, encouraging older people, encouraging people with disabilities, children to come and live in the city centre. We have a planning department, and I suppose backed up by elected councillors who see the city centre as a place of transition for young people who for a short period of time will live and party in the city centre, and then when they grow up and mature will move out to the suburbs.
So almost like dormitory villages for
which
the
is,
young. Yeah,
which is not appropriate. I mean, people want young people to live in the city centre. Don't get me wrong, it's a great place. And we have a huge amount of student accommodation now. But actually, city centres, lots of people want to live in a city centre. And we have to realise that we need to be creating sustainable cities where people can live the whole of their lives, should they choose to. But at the moment, they can't choose to live the whole of their life because the infrastructure isn't there and the quality of apartments isn't there. So when we looked at Rotterdam, Paris and Vienna, we saw a completely different approach to city centre living. And we all know when we go on holiday how nice it is to walk through and be a tourist in a place where people live. And we haven't got that yet, although 37,000 people live in Liverpool city centre. But the majority don't intend to stay there longer than a year, 2 years, 3 maximum.
I mean, we've talked before on these issues, and I've been to at least one of your events. But when I first came to Liverpool, if somebody had said to me about the issues you've just described on the waterfront, I would have been quite surprised, because the impression you're given are that these are, fairly good apartments with nice views across the water and close to the city centre. You wouldn't imagine that there are these kind of issues. Do you think people across the city are really aware of that?
Probably not. I think there is an impression that the whole city centre is luxury apartments.
Yeah,
because no apartment complex is sold that isn't luxury, even if it isn't. It's branded luxury apartments. In reality, the waterfront has a more expensive quality of apartments than some of the other parts of the city centre. And in the last decade, the apartments that have been built in the city centre, and some of the new ones on the waterfront, but by no means all, don't have a specification where you can actually bring a family. Now, speaking with the rector of the St Nicholas's, the parish church, the number of baptisms they're getting now from city centre apartments is incredible. The same must be true in the Catholic Church as well, probably at the cathedral or some of the outlying parishes. People are having children in the apartments, and where I live, when I went to City Quay, we had nobody. There was not a single child on the development. But 10 years later, we've got a huge number of babies.
They are staying.
They are. But the apartments were never designed for that. And of course, it's not easy to bring up a family of 2 or 3 children in a 1 or 2 bedroomed apartment. And that's the problem. Plus, there's nowhere to put the pram. There's nowhere to put a bicycle. There's no storage facilities of any kind. You can't even store the Christmas tree if you've got a false Christmas tree from one year to the next. We are not creating communities where people would want to do these kind of things. We're not building the buildings for them.
And so what's the solution? What kind of changes are you bringing about?
The next solution really is to, when we start building new apartments, is to make sure they're of a bigger size and quality. So we've got a thing in the city now called apartments that are being privately rented, the PRS, private rented sector. We've got 2 developments, one at the Keel and one at a new one called Baltic Village. Those 2, for the very first time in the city, have developed, although it's only for rent, a much better spec of apartment. So far more facilities than ever before, communal facilities, larger apartments with a greater number of rooms, storage facilities, good concierge facilities, opportunities for people to meet together. Now, some of that is the result of Engage constantly saying to people, in an apartment block, you need to have a variety of services on offer. But it's only the rented sector at the moment that is actually delivering that. So we're looking for new build in the future where people can buy an apartment that will have a specification that's higher than we've been used to at the moment. Mainly because we've just been building for temporary accommodation for students and young people.
So really, you're all about improving the quality of life for people.
Absolutely. On every level, not just where they live, but the apartment itself, the apartment block, and where the apartment block is based in the neighbourhood. So Engage was instrumental in encouraging this strategic investment framework document which the city produced a few years ago to include a concept called distinctive neighbourhoods. Because prior to that, whenever I went to meetings that I was invited to, we were just dealing with the generic city centre. Whereas now we're beginning to understand that actually living in road walks is not the same as living on the waterfront. It's not the same as living in the Baltic Triangle, and that's not the same as living in the commercial district. They're actually quite different areas, and we want to see that distinctiveness developed, recognised and enhanced.
And celebrated.
And celebrated.
Yeah.
So, for example, we don't want the commercial district or historic downtown to become road walks. Road walks with its party life and stag and hen parties.
I don't know anybody who lives up there, to be quite honest.
I know quite a lot.
You have to put earplugs in.
I know quite
after 9 o'clock.
It's a different. It's a very nice cultural area for people who need to be aware that they're right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
It's party town, and that's what it's like. But you wouldn't like to see that developing over in the commercial district, where people choose to live there because it's quieter. But the city isn't marketing its distinctive neighbourhoods in a way that a new arrival in the city would know where to go. So people do make bad decisions.
This enhancing of the quality of life, it's really reflecting. I mean, this is what the gospel does, doesn't it? Wouldn't you say? Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, I don't think I could have been more fulfilled as I have been these last, 10 years or more, in simply finding ways that I can help people to flourish, to live fuller lives as individuals and as a community. And I think one of the things that struck me sitting on some of the groups that I sit on, I've been amazed by the lack of comment from some of the really senior people in the city who are making very big decisions about how money is invested in the city and the direction the city centre is going to go. That the human question is never raised. We're questioning investment, value for money, jobs, building, and tourism, marketing strategies, numbers of people coming and going. But building a city for the people who live in it is not on the agenda.
Well, Gerry, thank you so much for coming on today. I mean, this is your calling, isn't it, really? It is a calling. It's not just something you do. Like some callings, we do slip into them accidentally. So thank you so much for coming on today, and we'd love to get you back again and sometime in the future to talk about new developments. And thanks, Gerry. Thanks for joining us for Faith Matters. Join us next time.